Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Every culture has its warnings, its ancient rules for keeping the shadows at bay. These are not mere superstitions. They are cautionary tales, written in the blood and tears of those who failed to listen. In Japan, they say you should never whistle after dark. The sound is an invitation, a melody that summons things that slither and crawl from the damp, dark places of the world. The story you are about to hear is from a man who learned this lesson not from a book, but in the suffocating silence between the notes. Story 1. The Serpentine Call. It was my 3rd month teaching English in the small, mountain-hemmed village of Osago, and I had developed a habit. Every night, after a few drinks with the locals at the town's only izakaya, I would walk the half-mile back to my small, traditional house on the edge of the forest. The path was unlit, bordered by thick bamboo and whispering pines, and I would fill the oppressive silence by whistling. It was always the same tune, a simple, looping melody from an old folk song my mother used to hum. It was a piece of home in a foreign land. An old woman named Mrs. Tanaka, who lived next door, warned me against it. "You must not whistle at night, Sensei," she had said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "It is a summons. The sound calls the heavy, the snake spirits. They will hear you, and they will come." I had smiled politely and assured her I would be careful, but I dismissed it as charming folklore. I was a man of logic, of the modern world. I didn't believe in snake spirits. A week later, I saw the first sign. After my nightly walk, I woke to find a strange trail in the soft, damp earth beneath my bedroom window. It was a single serpentine track, as wide as my forearm, as if something impossibly heavy and legless had dragged itself through the dirt. A python, perhaps. I knew they weren't native to this region, but it was the only logical explanation. I shrugged it off and went about my day. That night, I whistled my tune, as I always did. The next morning, there were 2 trails. They were closer to the house, looping around the old stone foundation. The unease began to curdle in my stomach. The following night, I made a conscious effort not to whistle, my mind replaying Mrs. Tanaka's warning. The walk home was unnerving, the silence amplifying every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth. I felt watched, and for the first time, I was afraid. I made it home without incident, and, to my relief, there were no new tracks in the morning. The relief made me bold. It had been a coincidence, nothing more. A week of silence passed, and the fear began to feel foolish. One Friday night, feeling particularly confident after a celebratory evening with my fellow teachers, I forgot myself. The familiar tune escaped my lips, a cheerful, defiant whistle against the darkness. It felt good, like reclaiming a piece of myself from superstition. I regretted it instantly. The air grew cold, and the ambient sounds of the forest ceased. An absolute, profound silence descended, broken only by my now faltering whistle. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. From the dense bamboo grove to my left, I heard a sound, a slow, wet, slithering sound. It was immense. It was the sound of a giant snake, bigger than any I could imagine. moving just beyond the veil of darkness. I didn't walk home. I ran. I burst into my house, slamming and bolting the flimsy wooden door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my living room, listening. The slithering sound continued for what felt like hours, a relentless, circling patrol around my small home. The next morning, the ground outside was a mess of wide, muddy tracks. They weren't just circling, they were probing. There were deep gouges in the wooden walls, scrapes on the window frames. It had been testing my home, searching for a way in. That evening, a frantic Mrs. Tanaka was at my door. "I heard it last night, Sensei," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "It has come. You did not just summon a spirit. You whistled a courting song. The Neurona, the snake woman, she thinks you are calling for her. You must not make another sound. I didn't need any more convincing." I spent the day barricading my windows with furniture and nailing the doors shut. As night fell, a typhoon rolled in, the wind howling and rain lashing against the house. In the suffocating darkness, I sat in absolute silence, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hand. I would not make a sound. I would not give it a reason to stay. Around midnight, through the roar of the storm, I heard it, a whistle. It was my tune, a perfect, melodic rendition, coming from right outside my front door. It was a playful, inviting sound, a stark contrast to the terror that had seized my heart. It was her. She was whistling for me. My blood turned to ice. She had learned my song. She was calling to me. Then, a voice, soft and sibilant, like scales sliding over silk, whispered from the other side of the door, "Sensei, won't you come out? It's so lonely in the rain. Whistle for me again." The doorknob, old and brass, began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I scrambled back, a choked sob escaping my lips. The wood around the lock splintered with a wet crack. She was impossibly strong. In a blind panic, I ran to the back of the house, to the small, grimy window in the washroom. I ripped it open and scrambled out into the mud and the driving rain. I didn't look back. I just ran blindly through the forest, the wind tearing at my clothes and the sound of that monstrous slithering seeming to come from all directions at once. I fled Asago that night and never returned. I broke my contract, paid the fines, and was on a plane back to the United States within a week. I told everyone I had a family emergency. How could I explain I was being hunted by a creature from folklore? For 10 years, I lived with the memory, a cold shard of terror lodged in my soul. I never whistled again. I avoided forests, quiet nights, and the sound of rain. I built a new life in a sterile suburban subdivision, surrounded by concrete and streetlights, 1,000 miles from any real wilderness. I thought I was safe. Then, last night, I was taking out the trash. The air was still, the sky clear, and from somewhere in the darkness, from the small, manicured park at the end of my cul-de-sac, I heard it, a faint, melodic whistle. It was my tune, my mother's song. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. It couldn't be. It was impossible. It had to be a coincidence, a trick of the wind. But this morning, when I went to get the newspaper, I saw it. There, in the dew-covered grass of my perfectly manicured front lawn, was a single, muddy, serpentine trail, as wide as my forearm. It ended at the edge of my driveway, pointing directly at my bedroom window. It wasn't a spirit I called. It was a predator, and it is a patient hunter. It has crossed an ocean, and it has found my new home. And I know, with a certainty that has stopped my heart, that tonight, when the sun goes down, she will be out there, waiting in the dark, and she will whistle for me. Story 2. The honest woman in the world of law enforcement. You hear a lot of stories. Cops are a superstitious bunch, and every precinct has its ghosts. But when I was assigned to a joint task force in Tokyo, my Japanese partner, Detective Tanaka, told me a story that was different. It wasn't about a ghost. It was about a gatekeeper. He told me of the Kuchisake-onna, the split-mouth woman, a spirit in a surgical mask who asks her victims a question. Am I pretty? Answer wrong, and she kills you. Answer right, and she reveals her mutilated face and asks again, sealing your doom. I dismissed it as a bogeyman story, a local legend to scare kids. I was a detective from Chicago. I dealt in facts, not folklore. Our case was a string of bizarre disappearances in the sprawling, neon-lit district of Shinjuku. 4 men had vanished in as many weeks, all last seen walking alone late at night. There were no witnesses, no ransom notes, no bodies. They had simply been erased. The only link was a piece of garbled CCTV footage from the first disappearance, showing the victim, a businessman named Kenji Tanaka, speaking to a woman in a trench coat and a surgical mask moments before he vanished down an alleyway. It is her, Tanaka had said, his face grim. She has returned. It's a woman in a mask, I countered, annoyed, in a city of millions during flu season. It means nothing. I focused on the victims, digging into their lives, looking for a rational connection. Kenji Tanaka was a notorious philanderer. The second victim, a club owner, was deep in debt to the Yakuza. The third, a freelance journalist, was known for blackmailing politicians. The fourth, a stockbroker, was under investigation for insider trading. They were all liars, deceivers, men who wore masks of their own. That's when I stumbled upon an obscure academic paper about the origins of the Kuchisake-onna myth. It detailed a lesser-known version of the legend, far older than the popular telling. In this version, the woman wasn't a simple monster. She was a vengeful spirit, yes, but her rage was directed at the dishonest. Her question wasn't a trap, it was a test. Her horrific injury, inflicted by a deceitful husband, had given her a supernatural ability to smell the stench of a lie. She didn't care if you found her pretty or not. She only cared if your answer was true. Suddenly, the case clicked into place. She wasn't a random force of evil. She was a judge, and the back alleys of Shinjuku were her courtroom. The victims hadn't just met a monster. They had faced a reckoning. My partner Tanaka was horrified by my theory. "You cannot test a demon, detective," he warned. "You are playing with a fire you cannot comprehend." But I had a fire of my own. No one knew it, but I wasn't just in Tokyo as a consultant. I was on unofficial leave, one step away from being fired. I had lied under oath years ago, falsifying a witness statement to protect my then partner, a man I considered a brother who had planted evidence to secure a conviction. He got a medal. I got a career built on a lie, a secret that had been eating me alive for a decade. According to my own theory, I was exactly the kind of person the Kuchisake-onna would be looking for. So I became the bait. That night, I walked the same path Kenji Tanaka had, through the crowded, glittering streets of Shinjuku and into the quieter, darker alleyways beyond. I walked for hours, the neon glow giving way to the dim amber of old streetlights. Every woman in a mask made my heart leap into my throat. Just as I was about to give up, she appeared. She stepped out of the shadows of a narrow side street, a slender figure in a beige trench coat. Her surgical mask was a stark white against the gloom. My breath caught. The air grew cold. "Konbanwa," she said, her voice soft, muffled by the mask. "Good evening." I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. She tilted her head, her dark eyes locking onto mine. And then she asked the question, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Watashi kaire." Am I pretty? My mind raced. The legend said to give a non-committal answer, to say she was average, to distract her. But my theory, what if I was wrong? What if this was just a monster with a blade? But looking into her eyes, I felt an immense weight, a profound sense of judgment. She already knew the answer. She was just waiting to see if I did. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I thought of her story, of the pain inflicted by a lie. I thought of my own deceit. "No," I said, the single word cutting through the silence. "You are not." I braced myself, my hand hovering over the pistol hidden under my jacket. I expected the flash of a blade, a scream of rage. Instead, there was only silence. She just stood there, watching me. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "So desu ni," she whispered. "That is true." With a slow, graceful movement, she reached up and pulled down her mask. The sight was even more horrific than the legends described. Her mouth was a gaping, bloody wound, cut from ear to ear, the scar tissue a twisted, permanent grimace. But her eyes held not rage, but a deep, sorrowful understanding. "An honest man," she rasped, her mutilated mouth barely forming the words. "A rare thing in this world." She looked past me, down the alley. "He, however, is not." I turned. Standing in the shadows at the mouth of the alley was my old partner, Dave. He must have followed me to Tokyo, worried I would finally confess. His face was pale with shock and fear. The Kuchisake-onna took a step towards him, the sound of her shoes on the pavement like a judge's gavel. Her head tilted, and her scarred mouth twisted into a terrifying, lipless grin. She raised a long, rusted pair of scissors from the folds of her coat, the blades glinting in the dim light. She looked at Dave. her ancient eyes burning with a righteous fury, and she asked him the question, "Watashi Kairo?" I didn't stay to hear his answer. I knew he would lie. He always did. I turned and walked away. The sound of his terrified, stammering response quickly drowned out by a wet, metallic snip and a gurgling scream that was cut mercifully short. I never looked back. The Kuchisake-onna isn't a monster to be feared by all. She is a force of nature, an antibody for the disease of deception. And in the dark alleys of the world, her work is never, ever done. Story 3. The tongue of the Gil science has a name for everything. Auditory pareidolia, the brain creating patterns from random noise. Mirages, light bending through layers of superheated air. As a hydrogeologist mapping aquifers deep within the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, I lived by these principles. The desert was a place of predictable physics, a harsh but understandable environment. The stories my Bedouin guides told of the Gil, a shape-shifting desert demon that mimicked loved ones to lure travelers to their doom, were just that, stories. Sand-swept folklore born of dehydration and solitude. I was a man of data and fact. I was wrong. My mission was a 3-week solo survey, 100 miles from the nearest outpost. My world was my land cruiser, my tent, and the daily crackle of the long-range radio check-in with base camp. Before I left, my lead guide, an old man named Khalid, with eyes like chips of obsidian, had given me one final warning. If the desert speaks to you with a familiar voice, he'd said, it is lying. The goal knows your heart before you do. It wears the skin of your memories. I had thanked him for his concern and drove off into the shimmering heat. For the first week, the solitude was sublime. The silence of the dunes was a cleansing force. On the 8th day, things began to unravel. It started with my radio. During my evening check-in, the signal was filled with a strange, whispering static. All good out here. Base, I reported. Just a bit of signal interference. We hear you, Tariq, the operator replied, his voice faint. But who are you talking to? Your mic is open. We can hear you whispering to someone. I froze. I was alone. I hadn't said a word before my report. Negative base. There's no one here. Must be a cross signal. But a cold seed of doubt had been planted. That night I had a nightmare. I dreamt of my mother, who had passed away from cancer a year prior. In the dream, she was lost among the dunes, calling my name, her voice weak and afraid. I woke up with a gasp, my cheeks wet with tears. The sense of her presence so real, it was a physical ache in my chest. The next day, the desert felt different. It felt personal. The wind whistling over the crests of the dunes sounded like a mournful sigh. The heat shimmering on the horizon seemed to form fleeting human shapes. I was on edge, my scientific certainty beginning to fray. I was driving towards a new survey point when I saw him. A man standing beside a broken-down vehicle identical to my own, waving his arms frantically. I pulled up, my heart pounding. He was my spitting image. He was wearing my clothes, had my face, my beard. It was like looking in a mirror. "Thank God," he shouted, his voice identical to my own. "My radio's dead, and my engine's shot." I thought I was done for. My mind struggled to process it. A twin, a hallucination. "Who are you?" I stammered. He laughed, a perfect imitation of my own laugh. "Who are you?" "I'm Tariq Hamid. I'm a hydrogeologist with Aramco. Now, are you going to help me or just stare?" This was impossible. I reached for my radio to call base, but he put a hand on my arm. His touch was cold, dry, like old leather. "No need," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We can sort this out ourselves. We need to get back to base. It's this way." He pointed east, directly into a region of the desert. My charts marked as an impassable labyrinth of steep, shifting dunes. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Base is to the north." I knew my location. I knew my heading. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of predatory annoyance. "Don't be a fool. I know the way." "Trust me," Khalid's warning echoed in my mind. "It wears the skin of your memories." I looked closer at my double. His reflection in the side mirror of my truck was wrong. It was thin, gaunt, its shadow elongated and clawed. I threw the truck into reverse, kicking up a cloud of sand. The thing that looked like me dropped the facade, its face distorted, the features melting and reforming into the terrified face of my mother from my dream. "Tariq, my son, don't leave me again," she cried, her voice filled with anguish. The emotional impact was a physical blow. Grief and horror warred within me. It was using my own heart against me. I floored the accelerator, not daring to look back as my mother's screams turned into a furious, inhuman shriek that was ripped away by the wind. I drove north for hours, pushing the vehicle to its limit, my sanity hanging by a thread. I didn't stop until I saw the distant lights of the outpost. I stumbled out of the truck, dehydrated and babbling, and collapsed into the arms of the security guards. Later, in the infirmary, Khalid sat by my bed. I told him everything. He just nodded slowly, his ancient eyes filled with a grim understanding. "The Ghoul is a creature of deep places," he said softly. "Not of the sand, but of the soul. It does not just imitate what it sees. It reaches into you and pulls out your deepest loves and your most profound sorrows. It builds a puppet from your past, but its reflection." I started, and my radio. The whispering Khalid shook his head. "The Ghoul has no reflection, for it has no true form, and it does not need a radio to speak. It plants its voice in your mind, a seed of doubt that sprouts into a chorus of deceit. Pew her mother's voice, your own voice, because it was already inside you, turning your own memories into a weapon to lead you astray. I've been back in the city for 6 months now. I left my job. I can't bear the silence anymore, because I know the gull's true hunting ground isn't the desert. It's the vast, empty quarters of the human heart. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when I am utterly alone, I hear a faint, familiar whisper in the back of my mind. It's my mother's voice, telling me how much she misses me, telling me she's lost, and begging me to come and find her. The hunt never ended. It just followed me home.